Welcome to the Aligned Interior podcast, where we believe that spaces should nourish, support, and promote your mental, emotional, physical, and your spiritual well-being, while also being true reflections of your most authentic self. Here we explore how the spaces we dwell in make us well and unwell, while also giving you the knowledge and the tools on how to bring you and your space into alignment, gleaning insights from acclaimed experts on the cutting edge of science and senses. I am your host, Sonia Randall, holistic interior designer and owner of The Aligned Interior. Thank you so much for being here. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode where we are going to be talking all things sound bathing. Our special guest today is Sara Auster, who is a world-renowned sound therapist, meditation teacher, author, and the creator of the app Pause. Sara has created mindful curriculum for the World Health Organization. She has also created FDA-approved sound baths as a complementary option for people who live with migraines. Sara has worked with companies like Apple, Google, Spotify, and MoMA to create inclusive sound bath experiences. Sara's thoughtfully crafted experiences harness sound as a tool to support self-inquiry, deep relaxation, as well as inspire meaningful transformation. I am excited to talk with her today. Let's go. Well, thank you for being here today. I'm excited to talk to you about all things sound. So I'd love to start off if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to becoming a world-renowned sound therapist and meditation teacher.
Oh, thank you. You know, to try and be as concise as possible, my path into this work wasn't exactly something that I had planned. Years ago, I experienced a traumatic accident that completely disrupted my life. And the recovery process, it covered, physically, emotionally, spiritually. It forced me to slow down and start listening differently to my body, to really everything that I was doing in my life. And I was already an artist and a musician. And so sound was familiar to me as I had been working with it. And I began to experience sounds as a way to start to regulate my own nervous system in recovery from trauma from this accident. And that's really where the journey into sound therapy and meditation began for me, out of this necessity to heal myself. But eventually that personal healing turns into a desire to want to share it with other people.
I love that. And when you said that you used it as part of your recovery process of regulating your nervous system, I just want to highlight that point because, for listeners that are not aware, that when our nervous system is in regulation, we need that for healing. Otherwise, you're in a fight or flight and you're not healing. So that's what I heard when you said that you used it for regulation. Was that what you had in mind?
Yes, flight. Wow, that's hard to say. 3 Fs. Flight, fright, or freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze. So sometimes, for instance, like anxiety for some people can be completely debilitating. So yeah, that's how I was using sound to help regulate my nervous system.
That's very interesting. And so to talk about some of the sound bathing work that you do, for people that are unfamiliar, how would you describe a sound bath?
First, I would say for those familiar with meditation, I often say if meditation is taking the stairs, a sound bath is like taking the elevator. So, a sound bath is a deeply immersive experience of listening where we're using sound and simple mindfulness tools to access therapeutic processes, not only to the body, but also the mind, also the emotional body, spiritually, all the levels.
So when you're accessing the mind, What role does psychoacoustics play in sound bathing?
It's interesting because my approach and my methodology has a lot more to do the philosophical aspects of how sound affects us, but also the technicality and scientific approach of psychoacoustics as well. And I hope you and your audience can appreciate this kind of perspective in that I feel that listening has the ability to help us transform our relationship to space, both internally and externally, because listening is all about relationship. So, without getting too caught up in the scientific, intellectual aspects of sounds and exactly how it works, I feel that that is sort of a metaphor that we all can relate to.
So when you say, relationship and listening, what I'm hearing you say is mindfulness and present moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Sound, because of its ephemeral nature, if you continue to keep your focus and your awareness on it, you are truly connected into the present moment. Sound is happening right now, and then it goes away. So it becomes a very effective tool for to access mindfulness.
I love that. And so in terms of well-being, what would be some of the well-being benefits, mind, body, spirit of sound bathing and the work that you do?
As we mentioned, that sound bathing can have a really powerful effect on the nervous system.
Mhm.
Sound can help us shift into a parasympathetic state. That's the rest and digest mode. And people often say they feel lighter, calmer, more connected, more relaxed, more at peace. Some can experience emotional release. Others find that it assists with sleep, managing anxiety or even depression, physical tension. And on a spiritual level, it helps people to feel more connected to something greater than themselves. And honestly, the most important thing of all those things, physiological, psychological, and spiritually, I would say, is really just the opportunity to slow down, to listen, to connect to themselves, their bodies, and really to that present moment.
So for you, now I'm interested in what, your sound bathing sessions look like. So would you be able
Yeah.
to walk us through one of your sound bathing sessions, how you would approach it, kind of how you move through it with the people that are there to experience it?
Yeah. So since I facilitate sound baths in many different settings, the environment and the space and the people in front of me has everything to do with my approach and how I facilitate the experience. So, that being said, generally speaking, most participants are invited to come into a space where they can lie down and get comfortable. The experience is then explained to them as what's going to happen, and there's an opening for questions if necessary. And then typically, I'll guide participants through a particular breath practice and then guiding them to an awareness of their listening, and then beginning to introduce different sounds into the space with various instruments and tools. And then at the end, there is a moment of silence for integration, and then we come out of the experience. So that's technically, if that's what you're asking, kind of the order of experience. But I also pause, which happens to be also be the name of my app, is also an acronym for the principles of my method. And pause stands for presence, awareness, union, stillness, and expansion. And so these are essentially the phases and the arc of the sound bath experience.
And when you say breath work, and you were talking about that
Mm.
earlier as kind of the part of that intro, is that because breath work is, kind of a very easy way for people to start to tune inward, as well as it linking to sound of the sounds that you actually make?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and to just expand on that, the breath. not only functions as an efficient, effective tool to start to begin to drop into that parasympathetic state if used in a certain manner, but also a beautiful metaphor for connecting inward and outward as well.
Right. That makes sense. As you breathe in, you're literally taking in energy and you're feeling that, and then you're releasing. And do
Mm.
you add visualizations with your sound bathing and sound therapy approach?
No, the idea with my approach is that at the point when the sound is introduced, the sound becomes the guiding focal point or focal
Mm.
points of the meditation. So, in many different modalities of meditation, there will often be at least one point or multiple points of focus to give to the mind. And so, once I finish the introduction and guiding and breath and awareness with my voice, I
Mhm.
then pass off the guiding responsibility to the sound that's being introduced.
Hmm. And when people are experiencing the sound, do you encourage them to follow visuals that arrive, just naturally? Or is it more to kind of bring yourself back to sound?
You know, everyone has a very uniquely personal relationship with sound, and so it can be challenging to manage those expectations, especially for somebody who's new to the sound experience. As with people who are listening, might have never heard of a sound bath before. What to expect, what should I feel, comparing their experience to others. And so, while some people might visualize particular imagery or colors, I'm not interested in influencing or inviting that. It's if those things arise, then it's absolutely interesting and acceptable and some more information for that person to explore. But often, what happens is then people sort of hear about those types of experiences and they say, "Well, I didn't see anything." One person sees colors or connects to somebody who's passed in their mind, and another person feels inadequate for not having had that experience. So I always encourage people
Mhm.
not to compare their experience with sound to somebody else's.
So would you say that it's a way what I'm hearing you say, and I'm thinking of I've had a few sound baths. I've done a few of those, but I've also done breathwork sessions and they've been separate. Sometimes they've been combined. But one of the what I'm hearing you say is that it's kind of, the unique experience of the person that's having it and naturally what their body and energetic field needs to do in that moment to bring them to a regular state. Maybe I would use the word alignment.
Hmm.
So, what I'm hearing you say, and I'm just thinking of myself, I remember I had a breath work session that was combined with, which is sound. People say breath work, but that's also sound healing. So,
Hmm.
but when I've had it, I remember having, as you were saying earlier, making me think of that emotional wellness and working through emotional body, where I've had things come up viscerally in my body that was very unexpected.
Hmm.
And so what I'm hearing you say is, as you're using the sound to help your body come to regulation or alignment, it will naturally do what it needs to do. Meaning, if there's something that needs to be released, it's going to be released. If you need to see a vision, you're going to see a vision. But whatever that looks like for you, you're opening yourself up to receive that.
Wow, that was so beautifully said. So,
Okay.
yes, 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 exactly. It is important to leave open the space for something to arise that is unexpected. That might occasionally be surprising or, uncomfortable, but creating a safe enough environment so that participants can really step into that experience.
Yes. I want to reiterate, what you're saying on trust because there is an element of that letting go that the participant, has to do in order to be able to receive the experience. That makes a lot of sense to me. And, it speaks to what you were saying earlier about where you're going to be giving the sound baths and the environments and really thinking about the whole experience so that participants can have the most optimal experience for them. Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with that being said, a lot of it has to do with that intention. If I'm facilitating a sound bath experience in a boardroom versus a hospital versus an art museum versus a space that might be more designed for these types of experiences, like
Right.
a yoga or meditation studio, the delivery is very different. And also, the participants have a different level of intention and expectation when they step into certain environments and certain spaces. So that has a lot to do with it.
For sure. I was just getting a vision of being in a boardroom and being like just like not wanting to be unglued. Like you're not going to want to just burst into tears. Rather, at a yoga center, that's more of a space to, I think, feel the full breadth of emotion in that way.
And right, the really the driving force behind my work in all these years has been to make the experience of sound and mindful, or as I call it, full body listening, more accessible to broader audiences. So that
Mhm.
means introducing it in a way that is a simpler, approach, which could show up as shorter experiences.
Mhm.
The boardroom, that's a great example. So, we're sitting in, office chairs around a conference table, and my instruments are on the table, and it's the middle of the day. We won't have a 2 hour cathartic experience. That wouldn't be appropriate for that setting.
Right. I and on that, do you have any recommendations on how someone could incorporate the healing benefits of the work that you do in their home or their everyday environment in a way that, they don't have to have a facilitator, but they're able to kind of tap into that to some level?
Yes, and this is a challenge that I've been trying to address for about the past decade in my offerings as people come to in-person experiences and they tap into fill in the blank, a relaxed state, a transformative experience, some kind of deep, meaningful connection, and they say, how, exactly what you're asking, how do I continue to do this on my own? And, initially, I created recordings first on vinyl and I had a USB drive. I wanted there to be a real tactile experience versus just simply putting recordings as MP3s on Spotify, these streaming platforms or videos on YouTube, that I really wanted to create, more of a tactile contained experience. And now enter the Pause app, which I really see as a space in people's phones
Right.
that the way it's designed, everything is made with hand, our hands, even the artwork, the thumbnails for the different recordings, that people could really come to this space in the app to tap into a 1 minute guided experience or a 60-minute unguided experience that might bring them into a deep, restful sleep. That there is just something that people can tap into in any part of their day. And then it's right in your pocket.
I'm thinking about, as we're talking about this and we're talking about the mindful aspect of sound and tapping into the present moment, it's making me, think of, so I'm an interior designer, I'm a holistic interior designer. And so that encompasses all senses for the home. But part of what you're describing to me, what I'm seeing as, a potential opportunity, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is partly just using that mindful practice around your home. What are the sounds that you love? What are the sounds that maybe might be bringing up some level of stress inside? Maybe it's the siren outside, I don't know, or maybe it's
Mm,
the dishwasher that's too loud that is like slightly agitating to you on a regular basis. But to maybe use it as well, it's a self-development practice, which I know that I saw that on your website that you use sound bathing and sound therapy as self-development. So just applying it to the home, that's where my mind is just going initially. But yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Well, okay. So for one, I love that we can talk about space like this, because I often think about, this inner terrain. So maybe perhaps I'm also an interior designer, but inside
Right.
people, not inside homes. Um, but additionally, I mean, it's true. It is important to note that just as sounds can be soothing and calming and relaxing, there are also sounds that exist that can be disarming and dissonant and stress inducing and can cause imbalance. And what I would say about these sort of unwanted sounds in the environment is to, for one, always protect your ears, of course, because high decibels can be dangerous for our hearing. But beginning to shift the relationship to those sort of unwanted sounds. For instance, I talk about, I lived across the street from a firehouse in New York City for about 10 years. And I really had to shift my relationship. Those sirens were, they were not going anywhere, and so I had to shift my relationship to that. And in my book, I talk about this where whenever I would hear the siren, of course, if I was in a dangerous proximity, I'd cover my ears, but then I'd say, help is on the way.
Mhm.
This is amazing. That's what that sound means. It's designed the way it is to alert us for a reason so that we get out of the way so that the helpers can go to the people who need help. And if you can remind yourself of that, take a moment, protect yourself from the loud sounds, but then also say, you know, these sounds, whether or not I like them, have a function. So that's one thing about unwanted sound. And then the other thing is I encourage people who want to start to incorporate sound healing into their home to have an instrument or two, around. I mean, I actually, you're asking all the questions that people ask, and I'm trying to, fulfill this need. That this is a bowl that I designed in collaboration with a company called the Om Store that sources bowls from Nepal. And I was like, oh, if we just had like a small singing bowl, actually, I don't know if that's going to come through my headphones, but
No, it
you can
did.
hear
My
if we
cat,
just,
my cat perked up.
right, just a small singing bowl. Actually, my husband and I integrate this. We chime this small singing bell before we eat dinner, just as to take a moment to really arrive in the space together, to separate from the day. I mean, those are types of rituals and practices that anybody can integrate, and you don't have to do a training of any sort to invite a beautiful sound healing instrument into your home.
Yeah, and you're saying a lot of things that my mind is also going. Back to where you were mentioning about the fire station
Mm,
outside.
mm,
Um, I love your approach there. And, it just made me think that our bodies are going to have natural physiological responses that have nothing. Sometimes it has nothing to, it can have something to do with an experience that was unpleasant, sure. But sometimes it's just DNA where loud noises tell our body alert, alert, alert. And your nervous system is going to come out of dysregulation, at least momentarily. And I loved how you said in that moment is really just being aware. So that awareness that you talk about in pause. So it's
mm,
like aware, my body is out of dysregulation. It thinks there's danger, but there's no danger. And then reframing it to yourself in that moment of help is on the way, I think you said, where it's giving it a positive meaning. And it feels like, over time, that may not completely go away, but it is a way of working with yourself to maintain, closer alignment.
yes.
And, on that with the home environment, as you were saying, there's some noises you can't get rid of, but it's a great exercise to figure out what may not work for you. And if they can change them. If they can't, don't. Like reframe. I mean, you can always reframe even with the ones that are unpleasant, but the reality is your body can only take so much stimuli in all different senses. So it's good to have an understanding of what it's taking in and being mindful around that. So I love those points. And then also where you talk about the singing bowls and having a ceremony or ritual, that feels like that can be a great way. I'm just thinking of it in terms of meditation. Often people will have an altar where they'll make a noise with a singing bowl or a candle they'll light, and your body will literally respond to that and immediately start to kind of go into a state of I'm more relaxed, or I'm becoming more regulated. And so
Mm.
when you said that, it made me think about how a singing bowl can be used in that way.
Yes, and also just to, again, like mark separation or even just mark awareness. Kids love singing bowls.
Mm.
I've worked with kids in many different capacities, but even just gifting these small singing bowls to my friends with young children, they know, oh, when we strike the singing bowl, it's time to be quiet for a minute, or we strike the singing bowl, it's homework time, or just integrating it in ways like that, so it has an association of something is happening now. Let's bring our full attention and our awareness to it.
Yes. And it feels like even an easier, happier, more pleasant transition, you know?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So back to self-development. And I know you've mentioned things that people can, they listen to this and they can link it to self-development. But how would you describe sound therapy and sound bathing, the way that you approach it, to be a way of using it for a self-development practice?
How you listen is how you live. So if you begin to really show up and cultivate a practice and an engagement with your listening, then it affects your how you relate to everything in your life. And it then, like, this slowness of attention then becomes a superpower,
Mm.
that when you listen deeply and to subtlety, as in a sound bath, then you begin to have more subtle awareness in the everyday. People report, noticing a blossom on a tree, these small glimmers that help us to access peace or serenity in our daily life. That awareness expands the more you engage with the subtlety of listening.
Yes. I'm thinking, for some reason, when you said that, I was just thinking of a bumblebee. I'm just thinking of pleasant sounds that
Mm,
you may not normally hear. But if you are
mm.
doing a mindful practice, I was just thinking of in nature where you can learn more about yourself. It's a learning tool of, I love that noise. That sound really makes my heart full, or whatever it is. That's great. I love that.
And then also attempting not to actually categorize a
Mm.
sound, but to what you said, to understand how any particular sound elicits a response in your body, but not to label it as good or bad, which could also show up as I love this, I hate this. That's good and bad, versus this makes my heart feel full. This makes me feel relaxed. This makes my body tense, and those observations without the judgment of the category
Mm.
of good and bad can also be helpful.
Yes, you're kind of bringing in that mindful approach, again,
Mm.
that people do a lot with meditation. You watch thoughts pass by in a river. That's like one common practice where you don't
Mhm.
label them. You
Hmm.
just see them drift on by.
Hmm.
You're an observer. Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about this, and he's just amazing. I
Hmm.
love him. But but when we're saying that of like watching thoughts move by and being an observer, that's who I think of a lot of the time.
Hmm.
So I had a thought. I actually read Sounds of Healing by Mitchell L. Gaynor that
Hmm.
I heard you recommend on a event that I think you did in the recent past.
Hmm.
And so I was looking at your site and I was reading this book and I just started thinking about animals, that instinctually release traumatic or stressful experiences through tremors or shaking. And I wanted your thoughts on, is there a link here to sound healing? Like, for example, a deer shaking after shock or like the vibration of a cat's purr. But this low frequency sound that humans also can do is just more of a social conditioning of where it's not that we don't shake after a stressful experience or traumatic or have an urge to do that. It's just more of social conditioning where people do that less often now, where I think you may see sometimes in corporate worlds where someone will have a stressful phone call and then they'll breathe out like really heavy, like
Hmm.
there'll be a release in that way. But yeah, this was just something I was contemplating, this natural body response to releasing and coming. And when I hear release, it's really coming back into alignment, equilibrium, right?
Yeah. And what I would say is the voice is a very powerful tool for any human who has one to access and use as much as possible. And very often, almost always, I incorporate vocal toning and various vocal practices into the sound baths that I facilitate. And for many reasons, is that it can help facilitate a deeply embodied, more somatic, experiencing of sound when you're using your own voice, when the sound is coming from inside versus outside. And additionally, it also helps to facilitate a big release and connection to your expression. They say there's two kind of different meanings of voice, right? There's the voice, like the sound of my voice, but then also your voice as in how you come across, how
Mm.
you express, right? Like as in a brand voice, for instance. So the two are very directly connected. And so I find that if people ever feel blocked or restricted in their creativity or their direction or in their life in general, that being able to access the voice and vocal practices helps to kind of free and open that creative expression.
So, in terms of, say, just science around sound healing, from your perspective, where would you like to see people in science invest more research around the healing benefits of sound from the standpoint of just getting it more mainstream, just something that, because some people really, they need to have a lot of science backing up sound healing, which I know there is a lot of science there, but I wouldn't say it's as readily accessible information.
Hmm.
So, you being a pioneer in this field, like what would you like to see shifts happening in that area?
It's really a great question. And irregardless of the research that continues to be done and come out, which is great and supporting the work and the industry and, all of that, I do still believe that sound is best experienced and not explained.
Mm.
And therefore, this need to intellectualize fully all exactly that's happening on a physiological, psychological, emotional, and spiritual level can feel overwhelming. And if more people could open up to have an experience
Mm.
of sound first and feel for themselves whether or not it's benefiting them, I feel that that is our best option moving forward, because somebody can read 100 scientific papers on the benefit of sound and still not be convinced.
Mhm.
And I often say I'm not in the business of trying to convince anybody that sound is beneficial to them. If it's not, then it's not, and if the experience doesn't resonate with them, then that's fine. Because as I mentioned before, each one of us has such a uniquely personal experience with sound that I don't hope that sound becomes prescriptive, because I think that becomes an impossible endeavor, really, because every human body is so complex and has so many variables, to it. So I think, yeah, I think that people softening to this idea of opening to the experience and then delving in to
Mm.
the how and why, once they've had an embodied experience of the benefits.
What I'm hearing you say is more around like a mindset of how we kind of approach. I mean, yes, sound, but what I'm also hearing and what I thought of initially was holistic healing in general. So, like just even in terms of medicine, or if you need something's off in your body, and really having that mindset approach of what am I feeling? What are my thoughts on what's happening here? Rather than looking externally for someone else. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not obviously valuable to have
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
experts' opinions and to chat with them, but to, I guess, put yourself on at the table with just as much weight. Like, well, wait, my experience is XYZ. My body is calling me to do XYZ. If I really sit and listen, how is my body responding to sound, as you're saying, or like, an experience that you're having? Does it feel good? Does it feel healing to me? It made me think of, actually, I recently, actually last year, I had COVID for the first time, and I actually had it really bad. And I was one of those people that it lasted for 4 to 5 months. I had really bad brain fog and fatigue. And I had this overwhelming intuitive desire to go to like leave the city and to just be somewhere that was closer with nature and to walk every day. And at the time, I didn't understand it, but I just did it, is the point. I just kind of trusted myself. So, what you're saying there just made me think of a couple of things. Trust yourself,
Hmm.
as well as, potentially like a little bit of this mindset shift of no one knows exactly what you're feeling and experiencing but you. And as much as everybody else has an opinion and may give you prescriptive guidance, ultimately you know how you feel, and it's ultimately your decision, but also what works for one person may not another. So it's really this individual approach and experience.
Yes, and I also think it's important to remember that the research that's increasing around sound and the benefits of sound is that science is now only just beginning to catch up with what many indigenous cultures and ancient practices have known for centuries. And so it's interesting then to come back to say, okay, well, I need, validation and convincing as to why this works, versus, the many of these things are time tested across, various cultures. So it's important to remember that as well.
Yes, I think, nowadays it's more that science is God rather than, and it's not, again, it's not to say it's not valuable. I don't want to give anyone that impression.
Same. Both are valuable. Yes,
Exactly.
science is
Anecdotal.
good.
Yes, we want science. But
Yes,
anecdotal and, as you're saying, tradition is also just as valuable. And there's information in there to be learned from and
yes,
to grow and heal from.
yes.
So, in terms of intuition, what do you think, like what role do you think sound healing plays in terms of, with intuition?
Well, I do feel that in order to cultivate a deeper, clearer, more meaningful connection to your intuition does require very deep listening skills. You have to be able to be a skilled listener in order to connect to your intuition, because sometimes intuition can be confused with anxiety. People have sort of like an overwhelming feeling. So it's important to know to slow down and get quiet enough to understand, when your intuition, like when you said, I wanted to go off into nature, and I just knew, nobody prescribed that to me or said that to me, but I just knew that's what my body needed. And so being able to get quiet enough to kind of listen in to that innate, inner wisdom requires the ability to listen deeply.
And, when you were describing how you offer sound bathing, what I heard was part of the process felt like the breath work, or, what other, I'm sure other aspects of the process, but it was bringing your nervous system to regulation, where then it's easier to open up to those other parts of you. Because when I'm hearing you say, like anxiety, you're not regulated if you're in a state of stress.
Mhm.
You're not in the parasympathetic state. So what I'm hearing is, being in a parasympathetic state is, I don't want to say it's imperative, but it seems like a very important component to being able to tap into and receive guidance from yourself and messages on what to do next or what needs to come through.
Yeah. And so, in relation to that, when you're talking about sympathetic and parasympathetic, when you're in that sympathetic state, you're in a contracted state. You're closed. You're
Mhm.
narrow focused in what you're able to receive and think about. When you're in a parasympathetic state, you're expanded. You're open. Your field of vision and awareness is more open because
Mhm.
you're soft and you're not in a state of feeling threatened or stress. And that, like we were talking about before, there are all these things in life that are creating perceived stress, that we're not really in danger when our phone rings 1,000 times, or an alert comes up for an Instagram post or something. It's like we're in control to kind of regulate how many alerts and alarms we expose ourselves to, generally, if you're living in this modern society. And so I think that this ability for people to be able to understand that that rest is different than sleep, that very often we're going from a highly reactive state of overwhelm and overdrive and full, responding all cylinders, to, if we're lucky, deep and dreamless sleep, completely like unconscious
Right.
sleep. But there's this in between place where real deep natural healing can occur in the body, and rest is different from sleep in that state.
Yes. And as you were talking, it made me just think of just threshold. And just in terms of, we were talking about earlier about everyone's different, and everyone has their own individual makeup and energy and all that sort of thing. And I just think it's important to highlight for people that when you are embarking on a mindfulness practice with sound or whatever, is understanding your own threshold in terms of what your upper ceiling is, in terms of stimuli. And there's no judgment, as you were saying earlier, labeling things. Like if
Mm.
your body reacts a certain way, you don't need, the point is, you don't have to be a certain way. You are exactly who you are meant to be right now, and love yourself. But also that everyone has different thresholds. Everyone can withstand, 5 rings of the phone before they're, maybe before they're
Right.
freaking out. Someone else might take 20, everybody's
Mm.
different. And I think that's really important. And I bring that up just because I think it also depends on your own makeup in terms of just even your nervous system. And I've thought about this quite a bit, as I'm from a very small, remote place. Like I had moose in my backyard and
Mm.
forests around me, and there was no traffic. Like we had 2 stop signs in my whole community. And I didn't realize until many years later, and after I had been living in an urban center for so long, just how much my nervous system was like this. And part of it is to also consider your environment and how you grow up and what you're used to, what your baseline is. Because I think people's baselines are different, and that's, okay. But I want people to, I guess, understand their thresholds and then like experience that with love and work with where you are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
So, I know we talked a little bit about your sound app. I'd love it if you could share, whatever you want to share about that app for listeners.
Yeah, so the app is called Pause, which is, an invitation to pause, but also, as we mentioned, the acronym, uh, which I believe is just a simple access point, a way for people to drop in. And the app includes guided and unguided sounds, meditations, and sound baths for any moment of the day. So they're separated into categories: pause AM, pause PM, pause sleep, pause at work. So when you need to take a step away. And with all these different categories, it gives the opportunity to tap into a moment of pause really whenever you need it. So it could be a minute, could be 5 minutes. There are some videos and some just audio that's more for sleep. And there's also a community component, which I love so much. No bots, all real people, where you can leave a comment on a particular session. And for instance, if one recording helped you fall asleep, and you could say, "Oh, I fell asleep in 5 minutes. I had the best night's sleep of my life," then I can see that and I can say, "Oh, let me try that one. Let me try that one tonight." So it's also just sharing of experiences is also really beautiful. And additionally, we have a daily mantra, we call it, which is really an inspirational quote or a theme of the day that can pop up if you turn on your notifications, just a reminder to pause. It's like one of those notifications. I actually have my notification to pause turned on my phone. It's like, it's 11 a.m. time to pause. And oh, that's the kind of notification I want.
Right.
So also that option and that functionality in the app, and just launched it last year, and the response has been really beautiful. So happy to share it with folks.
Yes, definitely check it out. And I know we spoke briefly earlier about collaboration for singing bowls that you did. I'd love it if you could just speak to the sound behind singing bowls, for one, of just, what is special about a singing bowl sound, as opposed to other sounds, as well as your singing bowls that you do recommend to people, for people that are looking to, look into trying this for themselves, or, starting their journey in this way.
It depends, there's many different kinds of singing bowls. There's metal, or sometimes referred to as Himalayan or Tibetan singing bowls. There's crystal singing bowls. There's crystal alchemy singing bowls. Now there's more and more options out there. So as not to have people become, overwhelmed, I would say that, the resonance of a singing bowl, again, is dependent on your relationship to that particular bowl. Without getting too technical, because I'm not sure if your audience wants to go here with singing bowls. One of the reasons singing bowls are used in a sound bath experience is their ability to produce several overtones. So overtones are the many layers that exist above a particular fundamental tone or note. And both metal singing bowls and crystal singing bowls tend to give off many overtones. And what that allows for, with our awareness of sound, is for us to hold our attention into many different levels of sound, if that makes sense, almost like
Mhm.
layers of an onion versus one fundamental tone. There are many sounds to hold your attention and your awareness. And they're very resonant instruments, which I do believe comes across in recording, but of course is felt much more deeply when you're in the presence of a singing bowl, that it's not just that you're hearing the sound of the singing bowl, you're also feeling the resonance of the singing bowl as well.
Wow. In terms of when I'm hearing you describe a singing bowl and the tones, I was also just thinking of layers to kind of like your subconscious. And so, I'm thinking, like, for example, for those who have done hypnotherapy, you use sound, obviously. Sound is a big part of hypnotherapy. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between the sound produced in singing bowls and kind of like with your subconscious and layers of consciousness as it kind of being a speedway to kind of go deeper and deeper in that way and to connect with deeper parts of yourself.
Yeah, essentially, there is an entrainment that's happening with the sound, not only a brainwave entrainment, but a physiological entrainment that is happening with the external sound. And so the way the sound is played, very often the notes or intervals that are being played and at what speed or tempo, and have very much to do with how your awareness as well as your physiology is in training to, or in training or syncing up with the external sound.
And
Is that
so,
helpful?
no, it is helpful. And again, what I'm hearing is an alignment, an energetic alignment. And I know in the book that you had recommended, Sounds of Healing, he talks about it down to a cellular level. Do you also prescribe to that?
I feel that for myself, but again,
Mm.
for me to attempt to convince anybody of that is, it is not my way. But I do believe, and as Mitch Gaynor, and then before him, centuries before him, Hazrat Inayat Khan, or Thich Nhat Hanh, or all these great teachers
Mhm.
who've said before, is that sound is vibration, and vibration affects us on every level. If you believe that we are energy and matter is vibrating in quantum theory, then of course, I mean, it's not a big leap to say vibration then affects vibration. And so all these levels of us are in a state of vibration. Why wouldn't an external vibration affect all of those levels?
Thank you. No, I love that. And I'm with you on it. I want to share, with the audience. They can take what resonates, leave what doesn't. But I think these are interesting things to contemplate and think about and, see how they sit with you. We're getting close to the end, so I'll ask you one last question. If you could snap your fingers, I think I know the answer to this though, based on our previous
Hmm.
questions. If you could snap your fingers and forever delete one sound from our man made environment, what would it be and why?
I think you do know the answer to this, and that's that honestly, I don't think I would delete any sound, because I believe that all sound has meaning, even the ones that feel disruptive, like car alarms or sirens, all serve a purpose. So I would try to meet those sounds with curiosity rather than resistance, as we discussed earlier. Help is on the way.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, thank
Yeah.
you for chatting with us today. And I'm sure that we discussed a lot of things that people will think about and learn from. And I encourage people to check out your app, Pause, as well as your website and your services.
Mhm.
So thank
Thank you so much. What a vast conversation we've had.
you. We have covered a lot. That's it for this episode. Please remember before you go to subscribe below. You can also check us out on Instagram at The Aligned Interior or our website, thealignedinterior.com. The Aligned Interior services are also available for hire. So if you have a residential, commercial, or a hospitality project, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at info at thealignedinterior.com. Until next time, be well.